Hello, human animal earthlings. It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman coming to you from Atlanta in late May of 2026. And I'm pleased today to be talking about one of my favorite places, Cumberland Island National Seashore here in coastal Georgia. I decided to talk about Cumberland when I got word from the nonprofit Defenders of Wildlife that they are working to prevent some new proposed construction on Cumberland Island and increased human activity. We'll also talk about the wild horses who live there as they were introduced to the island and they face some welfare issues and also cause some ecological issues for island habitat. As part of this discussion, we might consider the Trump administration's budgetary and staffing cuts to the National Park Service. But we're going to end the 20-minute segment on a positive note by discussing the Wildlife Corridors Act proposed in Congress to help wild animals migrate safely between habitats on public lands. To tell us about this is our guest, Kelly Cox. She's the Senior Conservation Policy and Planning Specialist at Defenders of Wildlife, where she works to protect imperiled species and their habitats on national public lands by advancing policies that strengthen the mission of the National Park System and National Wildlife Refuge System. The Defenders of Wildlife website is defenders.org. Kelly has a law degree and a master's in marine conservation, both from the University of Miami, and she previously served as director of Everglades policy at the National Audubon Society in Florida. And she still resides in South Florida, which is also my home as well. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, Gary. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, first, tell us about Cumberland Island National Seashore in coastal Georgia in terms of like who lives there, which wild animals live there, and what makes it special.
Well, I think anyone who's been to Cumberland Island can really speak to what a special and unique place
Yes.
it is. It is one of the last truly wild places along all of the Atlantic coast. It is a barrier island, and it has these really neat kind of combination of habitats. If you've been there, you know they've got beautiful maritime forests and salt marshes and dunes and freshwater wetlands and undeveloped beaches. And all of those special places kind of work in concert to create this wonderful ecological habitat for a variety of different species. And it's becoming increasingly rare. And so as a result, you have species like sea turtles or shorebirds and dolphins and alligators and bobcats and armadillos and migratory birds and listed species and all different types of critters kind of concentrate there on that barrier island. So it's a really, really special, really beautiful place.
Yeah. Have you been able to visit, Kelly?
I haven't been able to visit yet, but I'm planning to get up there very, very soon.
Okay, because I have been. It's not that easy to visit, which is good for Cumberland Island's wildlife refuge residents. But you have to take a ferry over it to it, so there's no bridge. So it's not like getting to Jekyll Island or some of these other places on the coast. And so it makes it more remote. And so there's a limited number of people that can go over there, and then you basically have to camp or come back on the ferry. And so you have to bike or walk around. And it's what I like most about it, besides the beautiful beaches are wide and just there's usually no other human around. Um, I really like the live oak trees with the moss hanging down. It's just so that's part of for me of what makes it so majestic. And then just seeing all the wild animal species. And there's also like relics of old mansions and stuff. So it's an interesting combination there for Cumberland Island. Another book a book I wanted to recommend to people is Will Harlan's book called Untamed. That is one of the best books if you want to find out about like the natural and political history of Cumberland Island. It is fascinating, and he put a lot of work into that book, Untamed. But I was concerned when I found out that there's, some issues happening now that are going to threaten the wilderness habitat. Can you tell us, Kelly, what's the latest human-caused threats to Cumberland Island National Seashore and what your organization, Defenders of Wildlife, or any partners you're working with, what are you doing to protect the island's wildlife?
Absolutely. So I think, Carrie, what you mentioned about how isolated Cumberland is really at sort of the cornerstone of this issue. As you mentioned, there are no bridges to Cumberland,
Yeah.
right? You have to get there by ferry. It's intentionally challenging to
Yes.
reach. And Congress made it that way. It was designated, a large part of the island was designated as federally protected wilderness, which basically is a very, very strong legal protection that Congress can assign to different public lands. And it means that typically speaking, you are not allowed to have like motorized equipment. There's limited number of visitors that can get into these places. You're not allowed to drive cars. And a lot of places, even bicycles aren't allowed. So it's a very, very high level of protection, recognizing the sensitivity of these habitats. And that's what Congress ascribed to Cumberland Island, sort of as setting the baseline here. So what's happening right now is that at Cumberland Island, we are facing kind of a special cocktail of threats, we'll call it. On one hand, there's a proposed visitor use management plan where the Park Service is looking at how to manage visitation on the island, which, as with most barrier islands, does have a carrying capacity.
Yeah.
Right now, it's about 300 people visit a day, and they're looking to more than double the number of people
Whoa.
that can come to the island.
Dang.
So that puts a strain on resources, as you can imagine. And like you said, one of the big draws for people to go there in the first place is that sense of solitude and
Yeah.
isolation and the ability to kind of commune with nature. So that's one thing that's happening. We're concerned about the impacts that this increased visitation will have, including the types of visitation. So, for example, the Park Service is contemplating allowing e-bikes on
Oh,
certain
no.
areas of the island. That would increase access to areas that would
Yeah.
normally not be accessible by foot. And so we have concerns about whether or not the Park Service has adequately looked at those impacts, and likewise what the impacts would be for wildlife.
Yes.
In some
E-bikes are noisy and scary. It's like basically having a little motorcycle. No thanks.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And in some of these areas, they're proposing to allow e-bike use on the beach, for example. And we
Mhm.
have concerns. What does that mean for sea turtles in nesting season?
Right.
What does that mean for shorebirds and listed species like the red knot and the piping plover that use Cumberland Island? So there are big question marks in our mind for what this visitation plan considers. So
Right.
that's one part of this. Another part of this is
Mhm.
that there is currently and has been for a few years a proposed series of land exchanges going on at Cumberland Island. And if you're familiar with the history of Cumberland Island, or if you've read Will Harlan's great book, you're aware that there are several families that live
Mhm.
on the island as inholding families. They have this long history, this great cultural heritage of existing on the island, the Carnegies, the Candlers, and others that live there on the island and have made it their home for many, many generations. And so those folks still live there to this day. They have properties, many of those historical mansions that you've mentioned.
And there's
Very,
one fancy inn, like the only place if you're not camping that you could actually stay is some really fancy, expensive inn that I've never stayed at. But
yes, the Greyfield Inn. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. But it's all this important part of Cumberland's history, right? And these families have been stewards of Cumberland Island for generations. But there's a proposal right now where the Park Service is looking to exchange park property for certain lands that these inholders own. And Defenders of Wildlife and our partners have concerns about these proposals
mm,
for a number of legal reasons, but not the least of which is because you're taking public land out of public hands and putting it back into private hands and allowing for residential development. And we're
mm.
concerned about that because this is not small scale residential development. These houses are going to be 15,000 square feet. They're very significant.
These are
And
like mansions.
yeah, they're big.
Yeah,
And
no.
again, this is an area that was intended to be protected, intended to revert back to the ecological state. When we're thinking about congressional intent in establishing the national seashore. So at Defenders of Wildlife, we're concerned about this. Is the Park
Yeah.
Service being thoughtful in the way that they're doing the land exchanges? Are they being transparent? We
Mm.
only found out about it because there was a county commission meeting and it was publicly noticed on an agenda. And
Mm.
there was kind of a fire drill where community advocates rallied and were able to get the word out about what was happening behind closed
Mm.
doors. So we do have concerns about what's going on. And this speaks to this kind of broader trend at Cumberland that perhaps we are not being thoughtful about this really delicate resource and this barrier island, and we're not being forward thinking and staying true to the intent of Congress in the way that we're managing the seashore.
Yeah, and it just also in general the idea of taking collected space that we all own. It's actually the only land I own as a renter. Um, and giving it and like selling it. So it does seem like we all should be involved in that. And also like what's the limited benefits to a few humans versus the long-term benefits to the whole ecosystem and all the wildlife. So yeah, these are the kinds of questions that need to be asked and need to be deeply considered. They can't just, I don't want them to just, bulldoze forward, literally bulldoze. Now, I also wanted to ask about the wild horses, Kelly, because when people visit Cumberland Island National Seashore, it's one of the few places on the East Coast where you'll see wild or free living horses. And I remember seeing a stallion who was grazing at the end of like the forest trail, and then you approach the beach. And I was
Yeah.
just admiring him from a distance until he moved on, because I was also a little scared of him and I wanted to give him his space. I
Yeah.
know humans perceive of these Cumberland Island horses in various ways. Like some people love the splendor of seeing wild horses, and others are concerned that the health and welfare of the horses isn't good because maybe they don't have enough nutrition. And then others are concerned for the strain that the horses put on the ecosystem since the horses were introduced and they're not native to the island habitat. What's the perspective of your team at Defenders of Wildlife when it comes to the free living horses on Cumberland Island?
Carrie, this is one of those really challenging issues, and
It is.
it could be one of the most emotionally complicated issues on Cumberland Island because people genuinely care about the horses,
Yes.
and we do too. And we at Defenders certainly recognize that many visitors have a very powerful experience, like you're describing, when
Yeah.
they see those horses for the first time. And not only that, it's part of the island's cultural
Mhm.
heritage. It's part of Georgia's history among other things. So these are complicated needles to thread. But at the end of the day, Defenders of Wildlife recognizes that these horses are not native to Cumberland Island. They're an introduced species. And we have, decades of scientific information that have documented adverse impacts to the island's ecology and the native species as a result of the horses. The horses are trampling vegetation in dunes. They are grazing on the dune vegetation and causing dune erosion.
Ah.
They are even trampling nests of species, nesting shorebirds and things like that, and threatening sea turtle nests, among other things. And in fact, there's even documented evidence of the horses degrading the fresh water quality on the island, which is in such limited supply for so many of the species.
Yeah,
Um,
like that's where the alligators live in the few
yes,
little ponds that they have in the central part. Yeah.
exactly, and they're degrading the water quality with their feces, among other things, and so it's it's hard for the ecology, and it's also hard conditions for the horses.
Right.
As you mentioned, there is this animal welfare concern, and these horses inherently just are not living as long as they should. They're competing for limited resources on the island.
They're
Um,
not fat and happy. You'll see that when you're there. Yeah.
Right. And if there's drought or limited forage or, things like denuded vegetation and whatnot, the horses are just not thriving, you could say.
Yeah.
And so this, in our view, is should not be a fight about people who love horses versus people who love the environment. That's not what this is about. This, for us, good conservation requires acknowledging both these animal welfare issues and
Yeah.
the ecological issues, and then finding a path forward through this, which in our view is that the Park Service needs to start managing the horses. This is the only park unit along the eastern coast of the United States that has feral horses on site and does not actively manage them, does not actively manage the herd. So that could mean providing veterinary care. It could mean providing contraception.
Yeah, I
Anything.
was gonna say birth control, if you determine that the cost benefit is too high for them being there, I definitely don't am not in favor of like shooting or any kind of violence.
Sure.
The birth control aspect to me seems a more at least humane way to go about it. And so, yeah, so we do need to have these conversations, but while recognizing the rights of the individual animals. And there's lots of other non-native species too, like wild boars and different things, but humans
Mhm.
tend not to like the boars as much, so they're just like, oh, kill them. But I personally care as much about anybody. I don't care really what your species is. So I don't give the horses any more kind of special treatment, even though I realize culturally a lot of people do. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think this is a real sensitive topic of if you can prove that certain animals are really in like harming lots of other animals because they're really not supposed to be there, which a lot of times humans fall into that category. Like maybe we shouldn't be there. Uh, then I want non-lethal solutions that recognize the sentience of those individuals because they're just trying to survive themselves. They're not trying to be destructive. So yeah, so we do need to think more about, yeah, the collective ecosystem and everyone involved, humans, horses, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I think that a lot of people equate the horses as these symbols of Cumberland Island, and we're certainly not advocating for eradication of the horses at Cumberland Island. They're a really important way that people connect with nature, but we have to make sure that the horses are not there at the expense of the native wildlife. So that's what we're trying to sort through right now.
If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature, and I'm host Carrie Freeman talking with Kelly Cox at Defenders of Wildlife, where she works as the Senior Conservation Policy and Planning Specialist related to conservation issues at U.S. national parks and wildlife refuges. Their website is defenders.org. Kelly, to end on a more positive note, I see that you recently wrote a blog at defenders.org on a new act that's proposed in Congress called the Wildlife Corridors and Habitat Connectivity Conservation Act, or for short, the Corridors Act. Can you tell us, in just a minute or two, can you tell us about the Wildlife Corridors Act and why it's so important for wild animal migration and survival on public lands?
Absolutely. This is a really exciting new bill that was introduced this Congress on Earth Day by Representative Beyer, along with a bipartisan coalition. And it really aims to address a fundamental problem that we have on our public lands, which is that they're becoming increasingly fragmented, whether that be by roads or mines or logging or other threats. And what this bill does is it tries to establish a framework for identifying those lands and connecting them in order to provide pathways for wildlife to move. So it seems like a very simple concept, but it's much harder in practice than you might think because federal lands have these different and sometimes competing mandates. So, whereas a national park might have a very protective mandate, a Bureau of Land Management property might be less protective and more open to extractive uses.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to find a happy medium there where we can put connectivity first and think about species that really rely on these large connected systems to move across those lands. So think about in the southeast, like a black
Panthers, yeah, bears definitely, and of course the Florida panther, which you and I would
bear.
relate to. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it's
And
a
there's so
really
many roads and like private property and stuff that's also in between these public lands. And so all that needs to be worked out to try to provide a path for them where they're not going to get run over or shot.
Yes, exactly. It's exactly that. So it's this whole idea that you can't just protect these isolated fragments, you
Right.
have to have corridors that connect them, kind of like pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah.
And so animals are increasingly facing those fragmentation threats. So, how can we provide that connectivity framework? And we think that this bill is a really durable legal solution to do that through a national system of wildlife corridors.
Well, Kelly, to wrap up, what can any interested listeners do to support the Wildlife Corridors Act or to support national parks like Cumberland Island facing so many threats?
I think that there are so many threats to public lands right now, and right now is the time for public engagement
Okay.
more than anything. And I know that can be really hard for our listeners here today. But listening to podcasts like this is just the first step. The second step is speaking up, attending public meetings, calling your representatives, and voicing your support for bills like the Corridors Act that are forward thinking and bipartisan and trying to be solutions oriented for wildlife. So I would say those are my top things. And then
Yeah.
finally, just visit parks responsibly. We often say that we're loving our parks to death.
Mm,
And I think that's really true. So just try to be a good steward when you go to parks. Thank a
yeah.
park ranger, of course,
Yes.
and support the organizations that are doing good conservation work on the ground.
Yeah, I love those ideas. For our podcast listeners, I'm going to ask just a few more questions of you, Kelly. Is there anything else you wanted us to know about Cumberland Island, like the issue? I mean, I know I think you had a federal FOIA. Oh, I'm forgetting the name of it, Freedom of Information Act request. So a lot of this had been kind of kept behind the scenes, and then you and some other partners, I'm sure, have worked to find out more about it. Is there something specific we should know about Cumberland Island, what's happening right now politically? I don't know, and who in particular maybe we should be pressuring or communicating with?
Yeah, I would say on the Cumberland Island front, there's going to be an opportunity to learn more about the land exchange issue coming up soon. A really good on the ground partner that's been following this closely is Wild Cumberland,
Okay.
and that's a grassroots organization, and they're going to be hosting a webinar here soon to share more information and detail about the land exchanges, including what you can anticipate from the land swaps, who's benefiting, where the land is changing hands, and so forth. So if you're interested in those nitty-gritty
Yeah.
details, I'd encourage you to look that up, and there'll be some opportunities for further engagement with the legislative delegation following that webinar.
Okay, so Wild Cumberland is the local group.
Yes.
Okay. And then also, how is the Trump administration budget and staffing cuts affecting the national parks and refuges? I mean, I talk about that a lot on this show. It's almost hard to keep track of. And so I don't know if you, in your position at Defenders of Wildlife, have kind of noticed a trend or had a chance to kind of wrap your head around what actually has happened and how many people we've lost, all that knowledge, and like they're already underfunded, these organizations, and now they're taking more money away from them. So I don't know if you've been able to have an assessment of like what you see is happening.
Absolutely. And it's been a tough pill to swallow, Carrie. I can tell you that. When we got word of the president's what we call the skinny budget proposal a few weeks ago, it originally included a proposal for a $1 billion cut to the National Park Service. And that was jarring to see on paper, especially when we are facing maintenance backlogs and we have so many other needs in the Park Service specifically. But I will tell you something that was a little bit of a boon that happened
Yeah.
last week. We got the fiscal year 2027 Interior Appropriations Bill, which is a very fancy way of saying Congress pushed back on that budget from the president just last week. And instead of a $1 billion cut to the Park Service, they only propose a $47 million cut. Now, I know that's not great news, but $47 million is not $1 billion.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference. And so the
Yeah.
Park Service was looking down the barrel, so to speak. And now, it feels like we have a little bit more breathing room. And certainly we're not advocating for
Any
budget cuts
cuts? Yeah.
at all, right? But we were we felt like a little bit of a reprieve that, hey, this is a bipartisan issue.
Yeah.
This is not a party line thing.
Yeah, everybody loves the parks.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
So,
we all own the parks, along with the wild animal residents there. So,
absolutely.
yeah. Um, and because if they, well, in these budget cuts and everything, any other budget cuts, that can include staffing. Is that true too?
Mhm.
Like if that's how they determine they need to save that money, then there might be even more cuts. Because I thought I had read that there was already about a quarter of the national park staff had either like retired or been let go or fired since the Trump administration came in the second time. So that, I mean, 25% of your employees, in this organization where they love, like when they work for the Park Service, they work for the Park Service. I mean, they get transferred to all these different parks. They make it a lifetime career. I mean,
Mhm.
so there's so much knowledge there that I want to pay respect to. Yeah, anyway, I guess I was wanting to have you talk about the staffing end of things if you know anything about that.
Yeah, what I can tell you on the staffing end is under the president's budget proposal, we were anticipating a staffing cut of 2,700 more positions from the National
Mm.
Park Service. And we're still awaiting the specifics in the budget tables from Congress to see how that all shakes out under the Appropriations Act. So we're not sure what it will look like, but I can tell you it's not $1 billion, right? It's only 47
Yeah.
million. So hopefully that means those really dedicated park rangers and the people who are doing the work on the ground, and the back of house people as well at the Park
Yeah.
Service are able to retain those positions and continue doing the good work to keep our parks running.
Right, because there's a lot of people like the foresters or the biologists, and they're the ones that are researching things, and you may not interact with them when you go and visit. So they're not just like, the people who operate the gift shop or whatever. And
Mhm.
so I think that's a lot of the positions that they're tracking the climate change issue, or they're tracking how many humpback whales are coming to Glacier Bay and has that declined, and maybe why has that declined, or like all that work that we don't even see, that maybe is kind of the quote unquote easier thing to cut, where the public may not notice it, but then we don't have that information to protect all these areas, from the climate crisis and wildfires and invasive species of plants and all these different things. Anyway, that's one of my concerns is all our data collection and the forward thinking protection that I know these dedicated scientists do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the institutional knowledge that they bring
Yes.
as well.
Yeah. So I really appreciate, yeah, groups like yours, standing up to these kind of situations and letting us know what's happening. Because for the day-to-day person is so inundated with lots of different other issues that this could easily get lost if we don't have you all at Defenders of Wildlife uh, working on that. So, but that's the end of our show, and I want to thank you, Kelly Cox, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for the work you and your team do at Defenders of Wildlife to fulfill your vision of a future where diverse wildlife populations in North America are secure and thriving, sustained by a network of healthy lands and waters.
Thank you, Carrie.
Take care. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. I record from Atlanta in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in the Muskogee Creek Territory and former range of the Red Wolf, now home to some coyote families and a million squirrels. You can access action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, wrfg.org/intunetonature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board, staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia at wrfg.org. And remember to take care of yourself and others, including other species like the wild animals who call Cumberland Island home. Thank you for listening. Cheers.